everyone. We've got one last Senate Education and Youth Committee hearing this afternoon. We're going to throw several more bills out on the floor from here today. No, I'm just kidding. Just joking.
You just made a lot of people break it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Senator Payne, would you start us off with a prayer, please?
Sure, bill number 7. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today, Lord, and we just thank you for all your many blessings, Lord. We take none for granted, and we thank you for each and every one, from the breath of life that you've given us today, that we fulfill your will and your purpose in all things. Lord, we just ask you to lead us and guide us in all our endeavors, that we reflect you in all that we do. For us in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We've got a special guest here with us today, Michael Allen Bernard. He was going to speak to us for a few minutes about testing, and we're going to have him go first because his class is actually listening to us right now. How are you doing today, sir? Yeah. Absolutely. Glad to have you with us.
Pull the microphone.
Yeah, grab your mic and pull it down. There you go.
I don't think that one works.
Oh, try the other one.
Yeah, we'll just turn them both on for you. There you go. That one's live.
Test. All right. Can I go? My name is Michael Bernard. I am 12 years old, and I want to talk to you today about the Georgia Milestone Test. I am very concerned about this test. This test is not what you think. See, this is only my second year in public school, and I have told my mom that I want to go back to private school because most of the kids are failing this test across the state. They are even failing the gateway years. To all the parents, hear me clearly. There is nothing wrong with your child. There is a problem with this test. See, when I took it in the 6th grade, there was nothing on it that we learned in school, and the questions were written very strange. The test was even harder than the benchmark. I asked my teacher to look at what I got wrong, but she said teachers can't see the milestones. In private school, they let you see what you got wrong on the test, and they help you get it right next time. At least in private school, they teach you how to pass their test, but in public school, they don't. I believe this test is designed for failure. Why do you accept this? Do you know most of the kids who fail come from black school systems? I know this because I gave my mom the scores from back to 2017. Last year, Clayton County did the worst. This test is not about achievement. It's about money, and that's not fair to us. We don't fail. It is you who fail us. I will never take this test again. In fact, I want all of you to take it first. Then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us today. You're a great speaker. Did all that off memorization. Thank you all for stopping by. Next on the agenda, we've got SB 284, Senator Estevez.
I cannot beat that.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for having this hearing. Greatly appreciative of you and to the committee for being here on a day where you do not necessarily have to be here. But this, I feel like this is a very important conversation. It's a very important bill that I hope that we could build off of in the future. And if we could amend it to include some tweaks to standardized testing and milestones tests, I would absolutely entertain that, particularly because at the end of the day, we should be ensuring that our children should be prepared for life and for career. And oftentimes these standardized tests veers from that. So I am here today to talk about opportunity weight, the opportunity weight, and educating children in poverty. And as you know, the public schools in our state are funded through the QBE formula. That stands for Quality Basic Education. And this formula was put in place in 1985, or actually a little bit earlier than that. Has not been updated since, although our world has changed dramatically since then. And one of the key ways where it has not been updated but could be is in how we fund school districts that have a significant number of children living in poverty. Why is that important? Because we know that academic achievement is heavily based on a family's income level in the state. And when I say academic achievement, I mean standardized tests. I know that these children, regardless of background, regardless of zip code, are just as smart as any of us. They have the same kinds of dreams, but oftentimes the resources in the classroom, the teachers in front of them, the schools that they go to dictate their trajectories in life. And I inherently believe that that is wrong, and one of the things that we have to change. In Georgia, if you took a map of the lowest performing schools and you overlaid on that map household income, those maps would be nearly perfect. Okay? There's a close tie in this state between high income families, high income neighborhoods, and high achieving schools. That's a fact that we cannot get around, which is why Georgia has been ranked near the bottom when it comes to performance for students who are low income versus those who are not. The best way that we know to change that is by ensuring that we are providing funds to students who are living in poverty, providing more funds, which is something that states across this country do, except for Georgia. Georgia is one of 6 states that does not provide additional funding for students living in poverty. Let me say that again. We are one of 6 states in this country that does not provide additional funding for students living in poverty. It's incredibly important for us to ensure that these students who do not have the resources to come to school necessarily prepared to learn, that our school systems fill those gaps. What does that look like? What does it look like to ensure that these students have the resources that they need? There are a lot of directional or direct instructional costs that go along with educating students who are in poverty. It comes with extra tutoring, additional support staff, indirect instructional costs, more books, more supplies. In many of our school systems, you literally have food pantries and clothing closets. You have health clinics, because if we really want to remove the barriers for our students to learn, we have to ensure that all of their basic needs are met. So it's indisputable that educating children who come from these circumstances just costs more, which is why these states have taken measures to ensure that additional funding is provided. What SB 284 does is it allots in the QBE formula for more funding to be provided to students living in poverty, and that is defined as students who are what we call direct certification. And there's a definition there in lines 17 through 28. It includes children who are homeless. It includes children in foster care and without stable housing. It includes children who receive SNAP and TANF benefits. And the reason we call it direct certification, not to bore you with details, but it captures all of those students, and it's what school districts are using now instead of the term free and reduced lunch, which is no longer used in school districts, or not used as much in school districts across the country. This is a conversation that I'm sure when you hear it, you think maybe a urban problem. It's something that that we talk about in Atlanta, but it's really not. It's one that affects counties all across our state. And in fact, if we were to apply a poverty weight to the QBE formula, a lot of the counties that would benefit from it are not in Atlanta or Metro Atlanta. They are actually in the north and southern part of the state. I have this map here that shows you by direct certification where these counties are. And if you notice, these counties are in the northern part and a lot of the southern part of the state. The darker counties are the school districts with the highest population of direct certification students. So in real time, that would mean that you would see an increase in per pupil funding for counties like Sumter, Bibb, Terrell, Richmond, Decatur, Crisp, Valdosta City, Dublin City. Those school systems would receive $2,000 to $3,000 more per child to help educate those children. And like I said, that makes a difference. Some school districts have already started to do this across the state and across the country to ensure that there are that we see some parity in educational quality, and you're able to do that without there being a impact on the rest of the state, on the rest of the school systems. In Atlanta Public Schools, for example, the funding is based on need. So there are schools that are receiving more money per child based on a number of factors. Income level of their families in the neighborhoods, the number of gifted students, the number of students with special needs, and some schools receive more funding per child than other schools. It doesn't impact those schools that may be higher income, because at the end of the day, what Atlanta Public Schools had done was set a baseline. Here is what every school should have at a minimum. They fund that, and then on top of that funding comes things like the opportunity weight, funding for poverty. We can very, very similarly do that here in the state of Georgia by updating this funding formula, which is what this bill intends to do. So my hope is that in the future, we can work on this together. This is not something that is unique to one party. This is a bipartisan effort. In fact, Governor Deal proposed something like this over a decade ago. And my understanding is that that did not get very far, not because of partisanship, but because of some internal politics within his administration. It's not too late for us to change this over a decade later, and I hope that I can work with all of you to do so. With that, I'll entertain any questions, and I know there are many others who want to present.
Got a question, Senator Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for that very succinct report, and very timely, very needed. I wanted to ask about the presence of wraparound services within the state. We spend most of the state dollars on education and those wraparound services, which most schools, from my years of working in school and just being in the legislature, do not engage in or have any kind of partnerships or connections with those wraparound services. Number one, because they really don't trust government. They really don't want folks in their schools seeing either what they are doing or what they are not doing. So how can we, although we put the money there, it's there, we just don't have the connection. How do we make that happen? Because I have some superintendents that said, no, we're going to do it by ourselves. And from year to year to year, it never changes. How do we make them?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we can all learn from is the fact that we have our lanes where we are the experts, and we should allow others to swim next to us and together to achieve a common purpose. And too often we're relying on school districts to solve the world's issues, instead of having them focus on what they should be focusing on, which is teaching and learning. Now, obviously, they can't do that if you have the need for all these wraparound services. And what we absolutely should be doing is encouraging our school districts to partner with organizations that actually provide those services much better, more efficiently, to students and their families. And that way, those superintendents can focus on one thing, which is what we need them to focus on, educating our children. Unfortunately, the way we have it set up now is because school districts are in need of these resources, oftentimes they feel like they have to control more than they should. And I think that if the state made a significant effort to ensure that that starved for resources, not necessarily the right word, but right phrase, but if we ensure that safety net, that there were enough resources there to provide those basic services for children and their families, then school districts would free up that control and actually focus on what they should be focusing on, which is, again, teaching and learning.
Senator Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey.
Hey.
$1 million question that I know we don't have the exact answer for, but it's one that I have struggled with for a very long time, and I think that you're shining a bright light on it so we can ask the question and have the conversation. Atlanta Public Schools spends approximately how much per child?
Right now, it's about $20,000 per child.
Okay. Forsyth County, which is part of my district, spends half that. Very significantly different, socioeconomic, a lot of other factors that all go into that, but they're spending half. Mm-hmm. One of, if not the highest graduation rates in our state. They're doing a lot of great and wonderful things there. How are we able to replicate outcomes where I think we can show that sometimes spending double the amount is not going to get double the outcome?
Yeah.
Right. So throwing dollars at it is not always the solution. So where do we take this conversation so that we can try to level up those poor performing districts that don't have the resources, that equalization, just throwing more dollars at it may or may not solve the problem? Holistically, I know there's a lot to fix there, but if you could sort of shrink wrap this.
So it's a great question, and one that I often grapple with, and I am one that firmly believes that money is not the solution to everything, and it's certainly not the only solution in solving our public education issue. However, money is needed for specific to address specific issues that are inherent in our public school system. When you think about Atlanta Public Schools, for example, we have a high number of children that are living in poverty in Atlanta. More than half of our school system is. When you look at that per pupil cost, what you're not factoring in, and I had to deal with this is when I was on the school board, what you're not factoring in is that 2 to 3 mils of our millage rate is paid to a 30-year-old pension issue. The fault of no child in school now. But literally, you have $50 to $60 million a year going to a pension issue from many decades ago. The Beltline and the TADs TADs are tax allocation districts. The Beltline is the largest one. APS, part of that money that is seen as going to schools is actually going to pay for things like the Beltline, economic development. That was optional. APS opted into that, right? But the cost per child is inflated by all these other adult decisions, and that money is not necessarily going to children. So when you eliminate a lot of those added costs, the money that is going to each child, each school, actually falls closer in line with what you would see with other school districts. Not as low as Forsyth County, though. The difference there is that when you're looking at an average child in Forsyth County, where the poverty rate may be significantly lower than it is in the city of Atlanta, those kids are very likely to have gone to pre-K, very likely have gone to early learning, some kind of daycare. By the time they're in kindergarten, they've been exposed to many more words. After school, they're going to tutoring, they're going to an after-school program, they're going to sports. They don't have to worry about food or eating. They have the health care that they need. Their parents have jobs. They're exposed to words. I can go on so on and so forth. And to the extent that there are any needs, then there are school foundations that pay for whatever that need is. If a teacher needs to go buy a brand new set of iPads for her school because the school has a lower budget, parents take care of it, right? School districts across the state, especially the wealthier ones, not the wealthy school system, but where the community's wealthy enough, supplement the funding for schools. We see that within APS. Within APS, the higher income neighborhoods, those public schools all have foundations that are similar and funding all kinds of programming, field trips, going across the world that you wouldn't necessarily get at a lower income school. So what's not captured in that number, that difference, is all of the other stuff that those students are receiving that the average student in Southeast or Southwest Atlanta, or just a couple miles from here, is not receiving. And I think that's what's not captured by the per pupil allocation.
Thank you.
And that takes a longer conversation, right? That's not a tagline. You have to actually explain it to people. My child, from the time he was 6 weeks old, was getting some kind of education. Same with my daughter. Their afternoons are filled. We have the resources to pay for that. Their summers are filled. We have the resources to pay for that. Most parents don't. And when you look at high poverty areas, whether they're rural Georgia, urban Georgia, they don't have that additional education that some of these kids are getting.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Payne.
Chairman. Thank you for bringing this bill, and then I'm and just as state juvenile probation officer for 30 years, and the kids you're talking about, and it's even in your language of your bill, I mean, those who are supplemental nutrition assistance program now, SNAP, but those are under that category, those in foster care, those receiving TANF benefits. Those are the kids I worked with for 30 years. And I just, I've always had empathy for those kids and that's where my heart's always been, with those kids that were under the radar, everybody's radar. And that's where I tell people for 30 years, I got to be the guy standing at the edge of the cliff trying to catch all the kids that were falling through everybody's cracks before they went over to the adult system. And, but education is literally, I look at that as a cornerstone. I mean, that's the game changer, is education from one generation to the next. And you go back in history of our own state, in every area of our state, the poverty. I was just talking to a good friend of mine this morning who's in his 70s now, but his father never graduated. His parents never graduated high school. His grandparents didn't even get through middle school before they quit school, and then to go to work. And so that's all over the state. That's rural Georgia, that's metro. I mean, but how do you teach? He was the first to graduate in college in his family, and that was a driving in his gut, that he was going to make it through college because he wanted to make his parents proud, to be that first one in his family. How do you teach that desire? I mean, because as a juvenile probation officer, it was generational, and overcoming so many of these barriers we have to overcome in this, that we're teaching, giving people the desire greater than themselves and their time, but for the generation to come after them, that we're doing, you see the value in those, that that they need an education that maybe I never got. But I need to make sure my kids have the value. I have the value in that education, that my kids get that, because so many times a juvenile probation officer, I don't mean to be I'm not dismissive of any of these, but just so many, the parents just didn't care. I mean, that's part of the, that was I tell people all the time, I said, my battle was not so much a lot of times with the kids, but so many times it was with parents still living selfishly and depriving the child of what they needed. And and how did we get to that where the kid becomes the center of everything that we're doing, that including in every family, in every community, in every pocket across the state, that we're teaching that value of desire for improvement. Because that's what's absent in this. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. And that's so many cases. That's, I guess, in essence, why I love my job, is because I got to teach that value into 15-year-olds and 14, 15, 16-year-olds for 30 years. And, when they weren't getting it at home. And so how do we, on an individual basis, with regards to rural, urban, how do we teach that?
So that's there's a concept called generational poverty, the cycle of poverty. And it's a much bigger conversation than just the K through 12 system.
Yes.
And it's more of a societal challenge that we have. I firmly believe that every child has the ability and can learn, can achieve. In the right circumstances, they can do it, right? I also believe that the vast majority, 99% of parents, want their children to live a better life than they lived. Some of the problem is that if a parent comes from generations of not being educated and not having the opportunities and not having the resources, then there's always a sense of playing catch up. And if you're always trying to catch up, then one, you feel like the system is stacked against you. The odds are not in your favor. Two, you may not even know of the opportunities that are out there to achieve, to learn, to grow. And that can hold you back, not because you don't want to, but because you've never been taught how. And for a lot of parents, what we've seen, and I heard about this in Marion City Schools, for example, where they have a significant literacy initiative that I hope the whole state adopts. And they went to parents and offered free after-school tutoring to help children read. And initially, folks thought, it was an added burden. There were going to be a lot of parents who were like, no, I don't have the time for that. The vast majority of parents opted in. And it's because parents do want what's best for their child.
Right.
Sometimes you have to talk to them about why it's beneficial, why they should be doing it. And a lot of them just don't know because of that generational poverty. Because as you said, their grandparents, their great-grandparents didn't finish high school. And that continues on. We see that right here in the city of Atlanta, where we have neighborhoods where generationally we have families where generation after generation people did not finish high school. And that has an impact on the child, and that feeling of always having to catch up. Now, here's where it has an economic impact. Back to Senator Still's question. If you're always having to play catch up, that costs more. In anything, take education out of it. If you're always trying to catch up, it's going to cost more. In sports, If you have a franchise that you're trying to bring back in, it's going to cost you more to bring people in, right? Education is no different. If you're always trying to play catch up from the beginning, then it's going to cost you more. The student coming from an educated household in Forsyth County, for example, they're going into kindergarten knowing their letters, knowing their numbers, knowing some of the sounds. So teaching them to read in kindergarten, it's a lift, but not a huge lift, right? If you have a student that is coming in who doesn't know their letters at all, who doesn't know their numbers, that teacher is going to have to spend a huge amount of time.
Well, I guess that's the gap I'm trying to overcome, is how do you teach into the next generation the desire to make sure that they're teaching, my daughter's got our grandkids, and, my grandson who's just turned 5 this past weekend, went to his birthday party on Saturday. But yet she's pouring into him. She knows she's his first teacher. And I mean, literally, they have school every day at home. Before he starts school, he's already having school. And how do we teach the next generation to have that desire to pour into their kids before they get to pre-K or kindergarten, that they've already been poured into? Because to me, it's that sense that they're sponges at that age. That's why I'm a huge proponent of making kindergarten mandatory, is because they're sponges at that age, and we're losing so much, as far as literacy. I mean, talking about early literacy, that's a game changer, because literally, as I've told people before, that's literally, we should all realize that if we're considering third grade reading comprehension scores and determining how many prisons we're going to need 20 years later, then the data, if that data is there to tell us what that generation is going to be like 20 years, we should look at that third grade data and realize we got to do more at that early age.
That's right.
To turn lives.
Well, and we have data that shows that education for parents should start at the hospital. It needs to start at the hospital. The partnership that the Cox Center has with Marietta City Schools includes not only Marietta City Schools, but includes the areas and the hospitals in the area, so that when a baby is born, those parents, whether it's a single mother or whether it's a two-parent household, those parents are educated on the fact that they should start reading to their child from day one. And if those parents don't know how to read, here are the resources, because some parents don't know how to read, right? Here are the resources to help your child read, even if you can't read. If you have those conversations with those parents early on, letting them know that because a lot of parents do not know that they are their child's first educator. Right. They think their child's first educator is a kindergarten teacher. Right. If you're telling the parents that, preparing them at birth, and you tell them this is for a brighter future for your child, so that they can have a better life than you led, I firmly believe that the vast majority of parents would do whatever they can to make that happen. It's on us as an institution to help provide that pathway for it to happen. And we see instances, whether it's in Marietta or others, where that is actually working.
Well, I just want to thank you for bringing the bill and starting the discussion. I'd love to have an opportunity for we're sitting down, not as legislators, but just as concerned parents and officials within our state, and just sitting down and having, around a coffee table, with coffee in our hands, and just have that kind of a meeting, just to sit down and discuss these issues with educators at the table as well. Just all sitting down and saying, okay, what can we tangibly do to better prepare the next generation for life? And just, I think I would love to be part of that going forward. Just thank you for at least opening the door to that conversation.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I would say, Senator Esfez, because of the work from Marietta Schools and their involvement in the Literacy Council, I believe we'll be one of the first states, with the Literacy Council, what's coming out of that is the birth to kindergarten, educating parents and getting books in their hands as they leave the hospital, and having those literacy coaches at the hospitals, which, that framework's still being done, but will probably be nurses as well. So, yeah, I know that's a big part of getting kids to read early on. It's a big proponent, and I'm excited to see what our state's doing there. We've got another number 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Estevez, for bringing this. I think I'm going to pick up kind of where you and Senator Payne left off, which is, you know, I mean, I really do. I'm with you. I think education is one of the most important areas that we can really contemplate and do something really that is going to change the trajectory of a child's life. And I see it very much as one of the most important civil rights issues of our day when you look at the disparities. And when you were talking about that overlaying kind of schools and poverty areas, and that they're almost a direct matchup, it reminded me and made me think again of a trip I was fortunate enough to take last fall to Finland, where we did a deep dive in their education and education programs and policy. And one of the things that I keep coming back to since I've been back is this idea that they have, and it's a mantra: every school is a good school. And so I think part of the question certainly is, what is the role of home, right? But then also, how does that intersect with the systems and institutions that we have that are also going to be institutions that our children come into contact with? Home, of course, being a primary one, but school being the next place where they're going to spend more of their time than anywhere else. And so I'm wondering, I kind of underlined when you said Georgia is one of only 6 states that do not have this provision. And in Finland, we learned they too have a provision similar. It's a little bit different because they start off different, but they will absolutely make sure that students have the extra wraparound, the extra attention that they need in order to succeed, because they want every child to have a real pathway. There's another mantra that they have, which is no dead ends. No dead ends. So you can go to school and go to technical, or you can go to school and go to a 4-year institution, and you can jump off a track and mix it up however you want on into adulthood. But thinking of those two, every school is a good school and no dead ends, and we're one of only 6 states that don't have this provision. I wonder if, I'm sure there are studies, and maybe you can share with us some of the information you see from those, of the advantages of doing this and what that means for the state longer term when you're able to have a provision like this, and what it means not just for of course, what it means for the child. I think that we can imagine and know, because many of us are investing in our children in the ways you were just referencing. But what does it mean then for the society that we're building in this state to have such a provision, or what have we learned from other states that have already done it?
Yeah. And thank you for that. So there are some speakers that I'm sure can probably cite some studies of the impacts of that. But a couple of things I wanted to point out in response to the mantra, every school is a good school, has a direct impact in the quality of teacher and principal that our students are in front of. And the leadership at a school and the teachers at a school are incredibly important. Mm-hmm. And if we truly had a school a system where every school was a good school, then you wouldn't have teachers leaving certain schools at much higher numbers. You wouldn't have principals leaving certain neighborhoods at much higher numbers. And that's primarily because when you're a principal or a teacher at a lower income school, or a school in a lower income community, you have to do way more work and way more things other than educating to help those students out. And that makes a big impact, because if you're at a school and they're having teacher turnover, where they're having new teachers every year, we have a school, one school in Atlanta Public Schools where we had for a period 10 principals in 10 years. How can a school be a good school when you have that happening? So it really does take ensuring that we are setting up the system so that not only parents believe that, but also employees at those schools believe that every school is a good school. And it certainly starts with having the funding and the resources to do that. And what happens when we actually do live up to that mantra and succeed, then we see fewer reports like we've seen from the chamber where we're having workforce issues, right? We're seeing more children and more families that are living up to their full potential, which ultimately benefits all of us across the state because we have a much richer tax base. And there are states where when you have the education level, when you have more parity in education levels, where your workforce is much more robust and much more developed. And that's something that the chamber has continued to tell us is a problem here in Georgia. We have to make sure that we do a better job of preparing our workforce. And of course, K through 12 education is closely tied to that.
Thank you.
Senator Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pollen is terrible today. Let's think about community support. Local, state, and national support. Public schools are hammered every day about something. And teachers get very weary. They get very tired because they hear the badgering, but they don't get the support that they always need. Leaders, local, state, and national, are very weak sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily, and when you think about parenting, parents are parents. Teachers are hired, leaders are hired to do a job. It's not always going to tell you that the parent's going to be there with you every day, or the wraparound services are going to be there with you every day. You have to be trained to produce good students, citizens, the very best that you can with the very best that you have to work with. But if we're going to badger public education every day and talk about how it's not doing what it purports to do with the amount of money that's being placed there, what do you expect? You know, teachers and those people that work in the public school sector are going to say, well, no matter how hard I try, I'm still going to be, at the bottom rung of the ladder, because I'm getting hammered locally from a state perspective and from the national perspective. So there's a disconnect in the way we perceive public education today. And how do we rebrand it? How do we go about making it more palatable for students? Because the public doesn't believe in the public education anymore. And they cannot turn away anybody that walks through those doors, no matter what their ills are. You just can't do that. So everything that comes to them, they have to sometimes remake and reshape them. But they don't get the credit of having done that. So you still have local, state, and national folks saying, we're giving you all this money, but you still aren't doing anything. But you don't understand the challenges that these schools are, having to deal with. And that's just my personal opinion.
And just a quick, because we certainly can't solve that in this hearing, but just a quick response to that, Senator, the 90% of our 90% of our students in Georgia attend our public schools. 90%. So at the end of the day, no matter what your belief is in the public school system, we have to make sure we address the issues in it because 90% of our students attend it. And that's not going to change. And that's pretty consistent across the country. So we have to fix it.
And that's the workforce, I'm sorry.
That's right. Now here's the irony in that is that when you poll most parents, it's kind of like Congress. Congress has a terrible approval rating. But if you ask people about their individual congressperson, they love them. Schools are very similar. They don't know. Schools are very similar. If you ask parents about the public school system at large, they're like, boo. But if you ask them about your neighborhood school that their kids attend, they're like, oh, it's great. There's a disconnect there that we certainly have to work towards resolving.
Thank you. We've got a few folks that want to speak to this bill. The first one is Stephen Owens.
I think.
Use that microphone because that one doesn't work.
Oh.
Thank you, Senator Estevez, for bringing this bill, and thank you all for coming to a meeting that you didn't have to. I can't tell you. The definition of a nanosecond in my mind is how quickly I see a meeting is optional and then reject it. So thank you all for coming to hear what I think is this really important issue that started here in Georgia about 5 years ago when I heard from the Education Law Center. That they felt like there was a gap in the way that we funded schools, that the money that was going to students who are falling behind wasn't delivered equitably across the state. So what we have for remedial education early intervention program wasn't being as effective as it could, and they proposed this opportunity weight funding. I'm not going to talk long about what I think is the hole in the middle of the way that we fund schools in Georgia, and will.
I'm going to get you to pause for 1 sec.
Yes.
Just because we do have several people signed up, and we've got this till 3 o'clock, so about 2 minutes per person. If we could.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Then I'm just going to end on this. The CCRPI, which is the way that we grade schools, and have decided that a huge number of them are quote unquote failing. 56% of the students in schools that receive an F are living in poverty. 10% of the students in an A school are living in poverty. It's a direct correlation with test scores, with how much these kids' parents make. This is a way to balance the scales in the favor of Georgia's children. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we've got Darian from Southern Education Foundation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comments. My name is Darian Burns, and I'm the Legislative and Public Policy Analyst with the Southern Education Foundation and a member of Fund Georgia's Future. And I'm speaking today in support of Senate Bill 284. Georgia's QBE funding formula has been largely unchanged since its enactment in 1985. And despite full funding of the formula over the past 3 years, it's essential that we acknowledge that this doesn't address the long-standing underfunding of our state schools, including more than $10 billion in austerity cuts and cuts to equalization and other programs. It's also no secret to anyone in this room that Georgia is only one of 6 states that doesn't allocate funding for students living in poverty. Unfortunately, there comes a time at which these statistics reveal our state's priorities, and we continue to be behind in other states in this regard. This issue is in more urgent need of attention, along with the passage of Senate Bill 233, which has the potential to divert more than $115 million away from our state's public education system every year to private schools. The public sentiment is clear on making public education funding a strong priority in our state, with more than 50% of Georgia voters across political parties opposing school voucher proposals, while more than 65% of voters strongly in support of directing state resources toward our students living in poverty, along with related priorities such as replacing the school's bus fleets and even creating a child care trust fund that would increase families' access to high quality child care and enable more parents to work.
In summary, adding an opportunity weight, which a lot of other states already have, is a policy that most Georgians support, that our students need and stand to benefit from substantially, and that our public schools clearly need. This legislation should be a major priority for this body as an essential step for strengthening our democracy, our state's economy, and education and well-being of all our children. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Maya Dixon.
No relation.
We talked about that at one meeting. I don't believe so, but
No, I don't think we are. I'm surprised.
we have discussed that in the past, though.
Yeah.
Wonderful last name, by the way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it too. As you guys know, hello. My name is Maya Dixon. I'm a student at Georgia Gwinnett College, and I graduated from Gwinnett County Public Schools. I had a big, long thing prepared, but kind of hearing what you guys have said, I figured I'm kind of a really good example of what happens when there's funding for students. My dad used to joke growing up that he was po. He wasn't poor. He couldn't afford the other O and the R. He comes from a mom that was 14. My mother was adopted at 15. My legacy is generational poverty. My dad's worked 2 jobs since I've existed, and the thing that has helped us, the thing that got them to the place of being able to work hard at pushing past generational adversities of poverty is the hope and stability of a schoolhouse. It's being able to go somewhere where they know that they can have support resources like we talked about, and they can have things like a reliable meal that they can maybe take home to their family, because the main concern of children in poverty is not how do I pick a college to go to, how do I make sure that I am excelling at the sports that I choose. It's how do I get food to my family, it's how do I make sure that I can get through this day. And I really appreciate this body's support of public education with the $200 to transportation, and I just think that dedicated funding to make sure that our schools are supporting students in the ways that they need and can address it locally in the best manner is really effective. So I think, just to summarize, that was everywhere. This funding is needed because the way that we get kids out of generational poverty is the hope and stability of school. And I know that there's a lot of problems in school, but a poverty weight is a very big first step to that. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Then we've got Francesca. There we go. Sorry about that.
All right, pollen season is kicking my butt. Good afternoon to the committee. Thank you for hearing this very special bill today. My name is Francesca Rue. I've been a public student all my life. I'm now at Georgia Tech, and one of my most treasured life experiences is attending Midtown High School in downtown Atlanta, where I went to school with a kaleidoscope of people who made me who I am today. But public schools are underfunded, y'all. Every school I attended put me in trailer classrooms for years. There's a significant disparity between the AP classes, dual enrollment, and career prep kids, and then the poor who are wealthier, and then the poorer, lower income kids who get much, much less of those programs. It's not fair, and we as a state can do much better to keep these vulnerable young people from slipping through the cracks. I helped co-write this bill last year with other education advocates because from my perspective as a student, it is common sense to boost everyone up and preempt all of the money that we would pour into remedial education funding. This bill should become the most responsible and morally correct piece of legislation that we could possibly pass to do right by our students. Funding schools helps everyone. It helps schools raise the quality of education across the board by leaving money to fund extracurriculars and arts programs from otherwise being shut down. It helps the education budget by preempting all of the remedial education that poverty necessitates when kids can't read in like 12th grade. And it helps the economy by creating a generation of students who are more ready to go to college, more ready to get higher paying jobs, more ready to go into research, and more ready to change Georgia for the better. I strongly support this bill as a student, and I urge that you all look at it in next sessions and that we keep this top of mind for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then we got Brian Ramirez.
Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Brian Ramirez, and I'm a student at Georgia State University. Growing up, I experienced the challenges of navigating between the Gwinnett County and Fulton County school systems due to my unstable housing situation. Stability was a luxury I didn't have. My mother, a single parent, who I rarely ever saw because she worked tirelessly to provide for my sister and I, working long hours every day just to make ends meet. And even then, there were days when I relied solely on the school's free lunch program, where a basic cheese sandwich was the only sustenance I could count on. Hunger pains often made it difficult to focus in class, especially considering considering I also struggled with an undiagnosed mental disability that we couldn't afford to address with professional help. Dedicated funding like that proposed in SB 284 is crucial for students like me who faced economic instability and its associated challenges. This funding could provide crucial support, whether it's ensuring access to nutritious meals, addressing transportation needs, or even providing mental health resources that were inaccessible to me during my school years. By investing in programs like the Opportunity Wait, we're not just addressing immediate needs, we're investing in the future of students who, like me, have faced barriers to their education. I urge you to support SB 284 and provide the necessary resources to give every student in Georgia the opportunity to succeed regardless of their economic status. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we've got our second speaker from Georgia Youth Justice Coalition. Oh, she, okay. Okay, thank you. And then we've got our last speaker, Jordan Madden.
Yeah, he's always smiling.
I'm always happy. So, hello, I am Jordan Madden. I'm a policy intern with IDRA, and I'm, asking for your support, as everyone else here, for 284, and that we can keep this conversation going in the spring next year. I grew up in DeKalb in Clayton County, attending various elementary schools, McNair Middle School, and Mount Zion High School in Jonesboro, Georgia. I'm a sibling of 8 children, and when growing up with a large family, it was fun and exciting. It was often challenging. We often endure rough times: foster care, homelessness, unstable housing, and lack of resources to thrive in school. Fortunately, I attended public schools that was supported by the community, which helped push my education further. I was given school resources during back-to-school events with the community and received uniforms from local churches and nonprofits. We were not always fortunate, though, and in class, we often had to endure large class sizes and lack of teachers and counselors to support students' daily needs, as well as not being able to eat a diverse and healthy breakfast before coming to school. It sometimes often put me and my siblings behind. It is a fact that academic achievement is heavily based on the family's income level in this state. In 2021, Georgia ranked 49th in performance between students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch performance versus students who did not. I would be considered one of those students. The Opportunity Wait Act is a unique chance to support students who are left behind for reasons outside of their controls. Students rely on free and reduced price lunch programs to give them the essential start to their day, which sets them up for success and gives schools the resources they need to support instruction. Lastly, this bill will ensure students receive the needed resources for classrooms like school supplies, textbooks, additional learning resources not readily available at schools who serve students living in poverty. And the facts are clear, and a lot of the other folks mentioned the facts. And I just want to mention that, while I am no longer a student going through the K-12 Georgia education system, I think about my other siblings who are. I remember the 20 years of budget cuts to the QBE formula and reflect on why I do not want my siblings to live in a world where their school must choose between a counselor and school lunch. We indeed can have both by modernizing the Georgia QBE funding formula and providing funding for impoverished students. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any closing comments or questions for the author? Seeing none, we are adjourned, but look forward to working with you on this next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.